Great nations are not bare-arsed broke. The USA is bare-arsed broke because of the size of its national debt, the annual cost of servicing it, whose growth has now become exponential, and the total lack of any clear pathway to reversing this descent into national self-destruction. The national debt is now $35.8 trillion. The annual cost of interest on it recently overtook the defence budget, currently $939 billion, to become the third largest budget item, now $982 billion, for which the American people get precisely nothing. It is simply the annual cost they have brought upon themselves as a result of the ghastly blunders they so often make at election time, choosing complete and utter no-hopers, deadbeats and charlatans instead of responsible and capable leaders. The national debt is currently 122.43% of the GDP of $29.3 trillion. Interest will grow to $1 trillion either late this year or early in 2025. Its growth is now exponential, and the enhanced inflation which will follow the large tax cuts Trump and the Republicans plan to implement will cause its growth to accelerate. Federal budget expenditure is $7.2 trillion. Federal tax revenue is $5 trillion, and the annual deficit is $2.2 trillion. Income tax revenue is $2.37 trillion. Corporate tax revenue is $479.3 billion. Payroll tax revenue is $1.64 trillion, but it must be remembered that this is a revenue stream which must continue to fund Social Security. Excise tax revenue is $83.6 billion, tariff tax revenue is $70 billion, and estate and gift tax is $30.7 billion. US total debt is $102.5 trillion, and total interest which has been paid is $5.3 trillion, remembering that this is unfunded. The annual trade deficit is $1.1 trillion, and US debt held by foreign countries is $8.6 trillion. Total US national assets are currently valued at $217 trillion, but it is important to remember that asset values will go down sharply or even collapse in the event of a major downturn or a major or total collapse. US total unfunded liabilities are $220.5 trillion. To me, there is no doubt that the USA as a nation is bare-arsed broke. The total collapse of the US economy is now guaranteed to happen no later than halfway into the new president's term, unless the USA returns to a responsible and sustainable fiscal course. Theoretically, when the next general election is looming in October 2028, current projections based on the continuation of current policies show that the national debt will be $50.8 trillion, 156.7% of that year's GDP of $32.4 trillion. Federal budget expenditure will be $12.3 trillion, total federal revenue will be $6.8 trillion, and the annual budget deficit will be $4.6 trillion. The cost of interest on the national debt will be $4.3 trillion, the largest budget item, almost as big as Medicare and Social Security combined, which would be $4.6 trillion. It can therefore be seen that interest will consume all of the income and corporate tax revenue and still leave a significant shortfall, leaving nothing to fund the rest of the budget other than Social Security, which must continue to be funded by payroll tax. Congressional Budget Office projections have established that the national debt would be $78 trillion by 2033. The people responsible for the USA's fiscal predicament are, firstly, Ronald Reagan, who with his across-the-board tax cuts overwhelmingly favouring the rich, put the USA on the path to self-destruction by causing the national debt to reverse its course of steady decline onto a growth course which caused it to almost triple over 8 years, along the way turning the USA from a creditor nation to a debtor nation whose indebtedness has grown ever since, and from a great nation into a nation in decline, following the typical path of end of empire. Reagan caused the national debt to rise from $914 billion as he took office to $2.6 trillion. He caused the debt to triple in 8 years and added more than $1.7 trillion in completely unnecessary and avoidable additional indebtedness. Millions of jobs were lost to other countries as manufacturing industries closed due to lack of competitiveness as a consequence of the high value of the dollar which he caused. The loss of trillions of dollars worth of US assets to foreign ownership and brought many other adverse consequences on the American people, in particular by starting the steady decline in living standards. For a comprehensive analysis of Reagan's fiscal policies and their disastrous effects on the US economy, refer to Day of Reckoning by Benjamin Friedman, Professor of Economics at Harvard, Random House, 1988. Secondly, there was George W. Bush, who placed the USA straight back on the path to self-destruction after Bill Clinton had diverted it from this path by implementing his deficit reduction plan, which shifted the distribution of the national income away from the rich in favour of ordinary people, slowed and then arrested the growth of the national debt, and then moved the budget into surplus, thereby solving all of the USA's fiscal problems. The surplus would have set a new record every successive year if it had continued, and that would have enabled the national debt to be paid down at an ever-accelerating rate to be completely gone by 2012, following which the ongoing surplus could then have been used to fund the Social Security deficit indefinitely into the future and ensure that program's solvency indefinitely. Bush's tax cuts shifted the distribution of the national income straight back in favour of the rich, which led to the steady decline in demand and eventually caused the economy to collapse into the Great Recession. Deficits, which ran to $500 billion annually through most of his 2 terms, grew to $1.7 trillion as he left office amidst the worst economic catastrophe since the Great Depression. As he caused all of the mess he left for Barack Obama, he was responsible not only for causing the national debt to almost double over 8 years to $10.624 trillion, where it should have been paid down to zero by 2012, he cost the American people $20 trillion. Thirdly, Donald Trump, who implemented a policy of tax cuts which had been proven to be disastrous on 2 previous occasions by the results of Reagan's and Bush's policies, and caused the debt to grow by 40% in just 4 years. It was as if policies which had failed twice before were going to produce a different result, the opposite result, a third time. Fourthly, the congressional Republicans, whose complicity in the passing of the legislation to implement the tax cuts, which were not affordable for the USA, was followed by their determination to prevent the reversal of this disastrous policy.